Hello. Welcome to the SIG Network intro and update. Thank you for coming to our talk and not a certain other talk that's scheduled at the same time, which I won't tell you what it is in case you didn't know, because I don't want people leaving. I'm Dan Winship. I work for Red Hat on OpenShift Networking, and I am a tech lead of SIG Network in Kubernetes.
I'm Rob Scott. I work at Google on gateway things and lots of other Kubernetes networking things.
I'm Adrian. I work at a company called SalesLoft. I'm a very new contributor to SIG Network. I've been here probably about a year. If you want to join SIG Network, they don't bite, which is really cool. So I would highly encourage it.
Hi, I'm Daman. I work at Broadcom. I'm part of the Kubernetes distribution team over there.
Hi, my name is Nadia Pinaeva. I work at Red Hat and do OpenShift networking, and SIG Network Policy API is my favorite SIG.
Ooh, I didn't even think to ask people, what's your favorite SIG or working group? So we originally had a bunch of updates, and someone pointed out that this is an intro and update. So here's your intro. According to our charter, SIG Network is responsible for the components, interfaces, and APIs which expose networking capabilities to Kubernetes users and workloads. SIG Network also provides some reference implementations of these APIs, for example, kubeproxy as a reference implementation of the service API. So basically, everything networking within Kubernetes eventually falls onto us. And we define new things and new features and keep things working best we can. If this sounds at all interesting to you, you can join SIG Network. You can come to our meetings every other Thursday. Easiest way to find it, I should have had a QR code. But if you go to kubernetes.dev, that is the contributor website, kubernetes.dev, not .io. And from there, you can find information about all the SIGs and join. So let's just get into the updates now.
Thank you. So yeah, let's talk gateway things. We've got a lot going on in Gateway. New in Gateway 1.3 is core support. That's been a long requested feature. Really exciting to see that one get across. Retry budgets, also brand new in Gateway 1.3. And then listener sets. Listener sets is if you've ever wanted to merge a bunch of gateways together or just have an insane number of listeners in your gateway, this allows you to do that. This specific thing was inspired by a request to have, I think, 1,000+ listeners in a single gateway, just really big gateways. But there's lots of other use cases here, like if you want to distribute your gateway configuration across multiple namespaces, this can do that as well. There's also another thing in here that is a little thorny, I would say, a little difficult to figure out, and this was TLS updates for connection coalescing. And connection coalescing is something that just does not play nicely with Gateway API, or more correctly, Gateway API didn't play nicely with it. An example is if you look at the YAML on the right and you imagine you have a gateway that has a listener for foo.example.com and star.example.com, you may think that a request to foo.example.com will always go through that listener. That is not always the case. Imagine for a second that you start with a request to bar.example.com, and that hits that star.example.com listener, establishes a connection. Then all of a sudden you go to foo.example.com, but you already have that connection open, and that connection is valid for foo.example.com. And so you keep on going through that same path. That's a bad and confusing thing. So what we've finally recommended is that implementations return a 421 that says, don't do this, but also, and we'll, instead of sending you through that path, we'll prevent you from going through that path. And it also will ensure that gateways warn you now if you have overlapping TLS configuration, like this example, which could be problematic. All right, there are some things that are going to standard in Gateway 1.3. That includes percentage-based request mirroring. So we already have request mirroring. You can already mirror to multiple backends. The difference here is now that you can mirror just a percentage of your traffic. Imagine that you have a very large amount of traffic and a percentage isn't precise enough. We also have a fraction as an option. For those of you who may not be familiar with the fun, nitty-gritty details of Kubernetes API machinery, Floats are just a no-go, so we have a fraction or an int, depending on the level of precision you want, but there is no float here. The other thing that's going to standard in Gateway 1.3 is policy attachment. This isn't strictly tied to the release, but it's more of a pattern than an individual API, but we have a lot of APIs that are using policy attachment. It's kind of a generic pattern to extend Kubernetes APIs. This is, if you thought of Ingress as an API with a lot of annotations, Gateway is an API with policies to extend it instead. That gives you better typing, more predictable validation, etc. Lots of benefits here. But yes, that's policy attachment. A rough example is that a policy can extend either a route, a service, a gateway, and add a lot of additional configuration to it. We have a couple Gateway API projects that are related. Ingress to Gateway can help you automatically migrate from the Ingress API to Gateway API. We'll be talking about that very briefly. And then Gateway Cuddle itself is something to help smooth over some of the gaps in kubectl when you're dealing with CRDs, because Gateway API is built on CRDs, and there are some shortcomings right now when it comes to using kubectl with Gateway API. Gateway Cuddle glosses over those and actually provides a lot of new functionality, such as showing you a full resource graph of all the connected resources, or if you want to see, for example, if a service is referenced by any of your routes or gateways, it'll show you that, and all kinds of other very useful things like debugging your configuration for you. Now, the other thing that is probably top of mind for many people is Ingress Nginx and Ingate. Any Ingress Nginx users here? OK, cool. Yes. Ingress API itself was frozen more than 5 years ago, and there haven't been any new features to that API. Ingress Nginx maintainers are shifting now to a new project called Ingate that's going to be focused on Gateway API support and not Ingress. Ingress Nginx itself is shifting into maintenance mode, and it's expected to be archived in approximately 18 months. So we'll dig into a little bit more of that. There's other talks that go into this at much greater detail than I possibly have time for here. But suffice to say, there's still a lot of work to do. Gateway API today supports around 35% of the features that Ingress Nginx does, and has plans, should support around 55% pretty soon. But there's still a pretty hefty gap there. We've got a lot of work to do to close that gap. There's other talks focused on that. I won't go too far into that, but just say there's a lot of work here. If you care about this area, if you want to help, there's lots of room for help. And specifically, if you want your feature supported in Gateway API, please take the survey. This is meant to give us feedback on what it is that is the most important features in Ingress Nginx. There's something like 118 annotations in Ingress Nginx. It's a really long list of things to support, and we want to make sure we're prioritizing the right things. The fun thing with open source is we really have no clue what people are actually using. We don't have telemetry. We don't know these things. So if you can help fill this survey out and give us that feedback, that would be great. And this is a very approximate timeline. Please don't hold us to any of these dates, especially the gateway dates. I can't say too much about that, but we're hoping this is about how the timeline will work for the next 2 years. And yes, that's all. I know that's a lot to take in.
Rob, is it pronounced Gateway Cuddle or Gateway CTL?
Cuddle. It has to be Cuddle. But I heard someone say Gateway Control for the first time today.
Okay, I disagree with you, but we'll figure that out later. So a few updates about kubeproxy and some KEPs. We're going to play some musical chairs with the microphone. Sorry about that. So in Kubernetes 1.33, NF tables is going to go GA, which is really cool because it's nice and performant. Something to note, however, is in this particular case, GA doesn't mean on by default. You still have to opt in to use it, and I think there's plans to change that in the future. Shrug, we'll see. Musical chairs.
So some improvements in connection tracking. We now no longer depend on the user space contract binary for cleaning up stale connections. We improved the performance, like we don't fork a user space process for cleaning up entry for every stale connections. We also added a contract reconciler, which solves the problem of the existing implementation, which was a best effort and triggered. And we also added some metrics so people can monitor the health of the reconciler, how many entries are deleted in total, and time taken by the reconciler. Multiple service side goes GA. It's a scalable and flexible way to extend the IP ranges, service IP ranges. It also exposes the service IP range. It is fully backward compatible and fixes some problems with the existing implementations.
Back to me. Traffic distribution, the particular prefer close is GA in 1.33. This is the third take at topology-aware routing. And in this particular case, we assume that the user is going to do a lot more balancing and handle all the balancing between the zones themselves, as opposed to the previous implementations, which were trying to be a little bit more clever. Something else that's happening in 1.33 is we're getting prefer same zone and prefer same node. The semantics of prefer same zone is the same as prefer close, and those are both in alpha at the moment. And you can read more about them in the linked KEPs. No QR codes, sorry. And then some more KEPs, a few smaller ones. Deprecation of status.nodeinfo.kubeproxy version field. That's been deprecated and being removed. DNS search strings have been a bit more relaxed, so you can set non-conformant but technically invalid but are used out in the wild search strings for your pods now. IP addresses are also getting a little bit more validation on them. Previously, you were allowed like .000 with that padding. That's going to be removed. There's a multi-release plan to get the API to reject those for security reasons. And then V1 endpoints are being deprecated shortly.
All right, it looks like we have plenty of time, so I'll start with a little introduction about Network Policy API in case some of you may not know the details. So we have a Network Policy V1, which hopefully most of you know about. It's a stable core API that lives in your namespace. And what it does is it provides you networking security. It lets the namespace owner define which connections are allowed or denied. As you can see on that slide, my backend namespace is secure. Nothing can get inside, except for the things I especially allowed, which is front-end namespace in that case. Now, the APIs we've been working on recently, and the fresh ones, are called Admin Network Policy and Baseline Admin Network Policy. These are cluster-scoped API. They are currently in alpha, and they are designed for cluster admins to set up cluster-wide security. So you can see on that picture, ANP doesn't live in any specific namespace. It's cluster-wide, and it affects multiple namespaces at the same time. So what the admin was trying to do here is protect all namespaces by default, but say, OK, traffic coming from the monitoring namespace should be allowed everywhere. Now, when you have an alpha API, what you want to do is to eventually get to beta with that. And during alpha, what we do is we experiment with the API, we get feedback, we learn from our mistakes, and as soon as we feel comfortable enough, we say, OK, it's stable now, so we will promote that. And that is exactly what we are trying to do right now. And we have a couple of nice improvements and simplifications planned right now. Some examples of those is we want to merge these two separate CRDs, Admin Network Policy and Baseline Admin Network Policy, into one. So hopefully it will make all our lives easier. We have some plans to rework our port matches to allow more protocols in the future. The most popular request would be around ICMP, so I hope some people will be excited about that. And there is one thing I actually wanted to ask for your help with. We did get some feedback saying that priority is a confusing word. So let's imagine we have two policies. One of them has priority 100, and another has priority 200. Now, there is no right answer here. Just tell me what feels intuitive. Who thinks that priority 100 would be applied first? Hands up. Ah, beautiful. Who thinks priority 200 will be applied first? Controversial. OK, thank you for your feedback. We'll count your hands exactly on the recording. That's very, very valuable information, seriously. OK, so the QR code there is our project. We have a GitHub project called something about the road to beta, which has all the issues we want to solve before promoting our API. All these changes are still in progress, so if you have any feedback on them, or if you think they don't make any sense, or if you really like them, please let us know. We're always welcoming feedback. And another part of promoting your API to beta is actually gathering feedback from the actual implementations. And we've had some new implementations lately, which is great news. So here is how our implementation picture looks like. We had some first implementations that were with the network policy API from the very beginning. That's Andrea and Oven Kubernetes. And we've got a couple of new implementations just last year. That's Calico, KubeOVN, and Awesome Kube Network Policies project by Antonio here. And we also have a Cilium coming next. They promised that they will do that. And if you have any projects on your mind, or you would like to see your project's logo here next time, we are welcoming new implementations. Please come talk to us. We are going to be super happy to hear from you. OK, and besides just the beta work, there are some nice, cool features we're also working on in the meantime. So one of them being tenancy, which has been a popular ask, which means that's a set of namespaces that you define as your own tenant, and you want to protect your tenant from the other namespaces in the cluster. You don't like them. So that's in progress. And another one is a mutable pod identity match, which mostly we are thinking about service accounts for now, as opposed to some dynamic label selectors. Hopefully that will be slightly more secure. And it has a list of potential improvements. So there also, you can find all these issues. Again, if you have any feedback, please feel free to give it to us. And there are a couple of completed things we've done last year. One of them is FQDN matches or DNS name matches. That is also fairly popular. It's an experimental stage for now. So again, waiting for my feedback. And another cool thing I want to highlight is Policy Assistant. That's a tool developed by SIG Network Policy API. If network policies themselves were not confusing enough, we are adding more admin network policy API, so which makes it even harder to navigate this whole space, which is why we have this awesome tool. It can do many different things. For example, it can let you test a new policy before you apply it to your cluster so that you know that it does what you intended to do. It can help you understand which policies are affecting traffic in your cluster, and it even works without a real cluster, just with a couple of YAMLs. It will help you simulate all the interesting things. Please take a look if you're interested in that at our demo on the previous KubeCon. There is a link, and there is also another QR code for our nice walkthrough for Policy Assistant. All right, still have some time to report from our multi-network friends. So multi-network is a SIG that has been working on introducing a concept of multiple networks into Kubernetes for a very long time. And one thing they've been trying to do this whole time is basically add these network fields to the pod spec. There's been a long-running discussion, but the outcome basically was, don't touch pod spec, do something differently. And that is exactly what is happening right now. So multi-network group is moving away from the core API development to the CRD-based approach. And what they're doing right now is using dynamic resource allocations that you probably have heard of already multiple times. And the point is, you probably mostly have heard about DRA in terms of like GPU allocation. So it's for resource allocation. But multi-network group says, what if we consider network interfaces to be resources and use DRA to assign multiple network interfaces as resources to your pod, which seems to be working. And there is a lot of exciting work happening in that area. They did have a much more detailed talk on that yesterday. So if you didn't attend that, you still have a chance to watch the recording. There is a QR code leading directly to that. OK, and that's all the updates we've had. Thank you all for joining, and we are happy to answer your questions now. There is the microphone, by the way. If you have any questions, please say them in that microphone.
Hello. Thank you. It's very exciting stuff. Two questions. One of the main reasons we haven't moved to Gateway API is most of the downstream charts that we use across the CNCF don't offer it. They're ingress only. And I'm kind of curious to hear about how we think adoption is going, what, if anything, we can do to help with, like, yeah.
Yeah, no, we're very aware of that. I think in the past month or so, we finally got HP route merged as in one of the core Helm charts. We're very much working on that. We want it to be easy to use HP route standalone without having to bundle all the rest. I know Gateway API is pretty difficult to work with in Helm. We want to solve that in the next year. That's a top priority.
All right, cool, thank you. And then follow up with all the network policy stuff. So I come from a traditionally network background, and the big thing with network policies is all the logs. And you can look at tools like Cilium that have their in-house thing that goes and does Hubble and all that kind of stuff. But the formats of this are inconsistent. And in the networking world, you have like NetFlow and SFlow and like all these different things. And I'm curious about, I appreciate this is like a day 2 thing, but as soon as I start blocking traffic, someone's going to go, did the network block traffic? And I have to be able to say yes. And it doesn't feel like, or no, and it doesn't feel like there's a good answer for that or standard about that.
So that's something that we have talked about in the working group. There's an open PR with some discussion, but it is not currently, we don't even have a fully functional idea to implement yet. And we decided that we're not going to prioritize that as one of the features for getting to beta. So
yeah, that makes
we do eventually want to have an answer there, but we don't have it yet.
Cool.
And vendors can still do their vendor-specific logging, of course. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
Anyone else? Everyone's networks are perfectly fine. You have all the functionality you want. Okay, Surya is pointing out that Nadia talked about DRA at the end, but maybe some of you don't know what DRA is. So DRA is Dynamic Resource Allocation. It's a new show of hands. Do people know about DRA? Everyone knows about DRA. Okay, we won't explain that.
Well, a follow-up to the ingress question before, right? I'm not sure I caught the answer. Like, I guess there's a whole ecosystem, we all encounter it day to day where Helm charts include ingress, not necessarily Helm charts managed by Kubernetes SIG's repos, right? Like Helm charts as a whole, which I think was some of the reference. So like, yeah, like is your answer also address that?
So what I think I'm talking about that merged a month or two ago, don't quote me on that timeline, but it has merged, is the way to represent HTTP route just as easily as you can represent ingress in a Helm chart. That's like the step 1 building block of this, but there's more work to do. This is the start of a process. We need to provide some good examples of how this works, and we need to make HTTP route more useful standalone. So you don't have to, for example, one of the challenges with HTTP route right now in a Helm chart is you have to point to a parent ref, like to a gateway, and what if you don't know what that gateway name is? It's just one more thing that you don't have to think about with ingress, really, because ingress works as a standalone thing. So we've talked about, like, maybe you could have a default gateway, and you don't have to think about it in that case. Maybe HTTP route. So again, just those kinds of things. If you have ideas on what would be useful, we really need feedback. That ingress nginx QR code, if you don't mind bringing it up, that's just like general purpose feedback for us. Thank you. Yes, that one. Any way to provide feedback, if like this doesn't have to be just for you're moving from ingress nginx. If you're moving from ingress and have feedback for us, please let us know. Or if you're not moving, just why not?
Okay, you mentioned that the ingress nginx will be deprecated, and my question is, will the new solution also support server-side includes?
What will it support?
Server-side includes, SSIs.
Yeah, maybe if you fill out that survey.
Okay.
So Ingress Nginx has had this problem that it's very, very extensible because it just lets you write Lua programs and snippets of config file that it doesn't even understand what they do. It just hands them off to Nginx and magic happens. And CVEs happen. And we want fewer CVEs in Ingate. So there will be some things that you can do with Ingress Nginx that you probably won't be able to do with Ingate. But also, they are trying to get more official features added to Gateway so that you can, it will be able to explicitly support these things that you can sort of do magically with Ingress Nginx. So fill out the survey.
Sorry, one last thing. Yes, I like exactly what he said. I just, it may not be exactly the same thing as Ingress Nginx, but we're trying to at least provide similar functionality that may be a bit safer in the cases like, for example, Lua is something that probably is not going to make it to Gateway API, but maybe we can have other similar extensible things that might be a little bit safer and easier to secure. But yes, I think that's all. So.
Okay, thank you for coming.